Coast Guard spots dog in middle of ocean. What they discover moments later leaves everyone silent. Dog in the water, 8 miles out. The call crackled through the Coast Guard radio at 5:47 a.m., cutting through the pre-dawn silence. Lieutenant Rivera lowered his coffee cup, squinting at the radar screen. The morning had started routine enough. Weather clear, seas calm, visibility improving with the approaching sunrise. But a dog swimming alone this far out, that was a first in his 15 years of service. "Confirm distance and coordinates," he ordered, already moving toward the rescue vessel deployment area. The response came immediately, along with something that made him pause. "Sir, the dog appears to be wearing some kind of tactical vest." 20 minutes later, the rescue boat's spotlight cut through the lingering darkness, illuminating a sight that would haunt Rivera for years to come. The dog was still swimming, moving with a deliberate purpose despite what must have been hours in the water. As they drew closer, the tactical vest became clearly visible, black, waterlogged, with official markings partially obscured by saltwater damage. The rescue itself proved surprisingly challenging. The dog, though clearly exhausted, refused to be diverted from whatever invisible target held its attention. When they finally managed to bring him aboard, the crew discovered something that turned a strange rescue into something far more disturbing. A police K9 unit badge, still attached to the vest, identifying the animal as Max Atlanta PD K9 unit. Sarah Collins hadn't slept in 36 hours. The last 18 of those had been spent searching for her partner, checking every corner of the port where Max had last been seen during their routine patrol. Her phone rang just as she was pouring her 4th cup of coffee, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and worry. "Officer Collins, this is Lieutenant Rivera with the Coast Guard. We've found your partner." The drive to the Coast Guard station was a blur. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Max had never disappeared before. In 6 years of partnership, he'd never even strayed during a pursuit. The thought that kept circling back, the one she couldn't shake, was that Max wouldn't have abandoned his post without a damn good reason. The sight of him in the Coast Guard medical bay stopped her cold. Max was lying on his side, his usually pristine black and tan coat still damp, his tactical vest removed and lying nearby. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, alert, intense, focused on the window that faced the ocean. Even in his exhausted state, he kept lifting his head, letting out occasional low whines while staring at the horizon. "He's been doing that since we brought him in," Rivera explained, standing beside her. "Won't settle down. The vet checked him out. He's dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise okay. Somehow managed to stay afloat for what we estimate was at least 6 hours, maybe more." Sarah approached slowly, her throat tight. "Hey, partner," she whispered. Max's head snapped around at the sound of her voice. His tail thumped once against the examination table, but his usual enthusiastic greeting was absent. Instead, he locked eyes with her and let out a sharp, urgent bark, a sound she recognized from their training. It was his alert signal, used when he'd found something significant. "Has he been cleared to leave?" Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off her partner. Something was very wrong. She'd seen every variation of Max's behavior during their years together, through drug busts, murder investigations, and hostage situations. But this was new. "He's good to go," Rivera nodded. "But Officer Collins? There's something else you should see." He led her to a small evidence table where Max's tactical vest lay spread out. The camera mount was empty, its waterproof casing cracked. "The camera itself is pretty damaged, but our tech team managed to pull some fragments from the memory card." He tapped a few keys on a nearby laptop. The footage was grainy and broken, showing only brief snippets. Water sloshing against a dark metal hull. Voices speaking in what sounded like Russian, a flash of something that might have been shipping containers. Then nothing but churning water and darkness. Sarah felt her police instincts kick in, pushing aside her emotional exhaustion. "I'll need copies of everything, including the rescue coordinates and timing." "Already working on it," Rivera assured her. But there's one more thing. He pointed to a section of Max's vest. See these marks on the shoulder strap? Our expert says they're consistent with someone trying to forcibly remove the vest while it was being worn. Sarah's jaw tightened. Someone had tried to strip Max of his police gear, which meant this wasn't just a case of a dog wandering off. This was something else entirely. Captain Wilson was waiting in Sarah's office when she arrived at the precinct 2 hours later. "Collins," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I trust your partner is recovered." "Yes, sir." Sarah stood in the doorway, blocking Max from entering. Something in her superior's tone set off warning bells. "He's exhausted, but cleared for duty." "Good to hear." Wilson nodded, then fixed her with a stern look. "I understand you're planning to open an investigation into his swimming expedition?" "Sir, Max was forcibly stripped of his equipment and found swimming offshore, probably chasing some fisherman's catch." Wilson cut her off. "Look, Collins, I know how close you are to your K9, but sometimes dogs just follow their instincts. File the equipment damage report and take a few days off, both of you." Sarah felt Max tense beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. It was subtle, but she knew Wilson heard it. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's an order, Officer Collins. Stand down." As Wilson brushed past them, Sarah placed a calming hand on Max's head. But her partner's eyes never left the captain's retreating form, and that same unsettling growl continued until Wilson was out of sight. In 6 years, Max had never growled at a fellow officer. Never. Sarah crouched beside her partner, studying his face. The exhaustion was evident in his eyes, but there was something else there too, an urgency she'd never seen before. Max turned his head toward the window, toward the distant sound of waves, and let out a soft whine. Back in the Coast Guard station, he'd been doing the same thing, staring out at the ocean as if trying to tell her something. Sarah had learned long ago to trust Max's instincts. They'd saved her life more times than she could count. Right now, those instincts were telling her that something was very wrong. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. Someone out there knew why her partner had been found swimming 8 miles offshore. Someone knew what he'd discovered that was worth trying to kill him over, and Sarah was going to find out what it was. Sarah's fingers moved across her keyboard in the dim light of her office, the clock on her desk showing 2:17 a.m. Max lay at her feet, but she could tell from his breathing that he wasn't asleep. Ever since their return from the Coast Guard station 20 hours ago, he hadn't truly rested, maintaining a state of constant vigilance she'd never seen before. The GPS data from Max's damaged vest flickered on her screen, a straight line cutting through the ocean, moving at a steady 17 knots before suddenly stopping 8 miles out. Not the erratic pattern of a dog swimming after fish or following a whim. This was the track of something much larger. A vessel. A sharp bark from Max made her jump. He was on his feet, staring at her office window. Sarah tensed, following his gaze, but saw only darkness beyond the glass. The port stretched out below, a maze of containers and cranes outlined by security lights. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, but Max was already moving to the door, his posture rigid. 6 years of partnership had taught her to read every nuance of his body language. This wasn't his usual alert behavior. This was something more urgent. Sarah grabbed her jacket and followed. The night shift officers barely glanced up as she and Max made their way through the precinct. They were used to K9 officers keeping odd hours, following their partner's instincts. The port air hit them with a mix of salt and diesel. Max moved with purpose, leading her past rows of stacked containers toward the main docking area. Sarah kept one hand near her weapon, every sense alert. The security cameras tracked their movement, but she noticed something odd. Several units were turned away from their usual positions. Max stopped abruptly at Pier 17, his attention fixed on a massive cargo ship moored in the darkness. The vessel's name, Baltic Trader, was barely visible in the dim light. Something about the ship made Sarah's instincts prickle. The deck was too quiet, no crew visible despite the loading equipment being clearly active. Her partner's behavior changed the moment they got closer to the ship. The same intense focus she'd seen at the Coast Guard station returned, but now mixed with something else, a trembling tension she recognized from their most dangerous operations. A sound of boots on metal made them both freeze. A figure appeared at the ship's rail, the brief flare of a cigarette illuminating a face for just a moment. The man spoke rapidly in Russian into a radio, his tone urgent. Max's reaction was immediate and shocking. A low growl rumbled in his chest, the same sound he'd made in Captain Wilson's presence. Sarah pulled them both behind a stack of containers, her mind racing. She'd never heard Max make that sound before yesterday, and now twice in 24 hours. The radio crackled again above them. More Russian, followed by the distinctive sound of someone descending the ship's gangway. Sarah held her breath, feeling Max tense beside her. Heavy footsteps approached their position. Just as she prepared to reach for her weapon, a familiar voice cut through the darkness. "Working late, Officer Collins." Captain Wilson stepped around the corner, his face unreadable in the shadows. Max's growl deepened. "Routine patrol, sir," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice neutral. Max seemed to pick up something interesting. "At 2 in the morning." Wilson's tone was light, but something in it raised every warning flag in Sarah's mind. "Interesting choice of location. The Baltic Trader is a clean ship. We checked it thoroughly yesterday." Sarah felt Max press against her leg, a signal they'd developed over years of working together. Warning, danger. "Of course, sir," she said carefully. "We'll move on to another section." "Good idea." Wilson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, and Collins? I meant what I said about taking some time off. You and Max have been through enough excitement lately." They watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing off the containers. Only when he was gone did Sarah realize she'd been holding her breath. Max hadn't relaxed at all, his attention still fixed on the Baltic Trader. Back in her car, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "Mike, it's Sarah Collins. Remember when you said you owed me a favor after that customs thing last year? I need everything you can find on a cargo ship called the Baltic Trader. And Mike, I need to know if it was anywhere near these coordinates 18 hours ago." She rattled off the numbers from Max's GPS data, watching her partner in the rearview mirror. He hadn't taken his eyes off the ship. The response came faster than she expected. Mike's voice was tense. "Sarah, that's not possible. According to all official records, the Baltic Trader was docked in Savannah yesterday. It couldn't have been at those coordinates." But it had been. Sarah was sure of it. The pieces were starting to come together. The damaged equipment, the Russian voices on Max's camera, Wilson's unusual behavior, and now a ship that officially couldn't have been where she knew it must have been. A sharp whine from Max drew her attention. He was staring at something through the windshield. Following his gaze, Sarah noticed a figure on the ship's deck, taking photos in their direction. She started the engine, but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, she watched the Baltic Trader's reflection in her side mirror, committing every detail to memory. Whatever was happening here, she was now certain of one thing. Her partner hadn't ended up 8 miles out in the Atlantic by accident. He'd found something big enough that someone had tried to kill him to keep it quiet. As they pulled away from the port, Sarah glanced at Max. "We're not letting this go, are we, boy?" His only response was to stare straight ahead, that same determined tension in every line of his body. Sarah nodded slowly. They'd been partners long enough for her to know this was just the beginning. In the distance, the Baltic Trader's deck lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the water. Somewhere on that ship was the truth about what had happened to Max. And no matter what Captain Wilson or anyone else said, they were going to find it, even if it meant putting their lives on the line one more time. The photo frame hit Sarah's desk with a dull thud. Its worn edges and water-stained glass spoke of years spent hidden away, not displayed like the newer ones lining her office walls. The image showed a younger Sarah standing beside a tall, broad-shouldered man, both in Atlanta PD uniforms. Between them sat a German shepherd wearing a K9 vest. "Detective Marcus Chen," Mike said, sliding more files across her desk. "Your former partner. killed during Operation Black Pearl 6 years ago. He paused, watching Sarah's reaction. The same operation that first exposed the Russian Lastochka syndicate's presence in Atlanta's ports. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the frame. Max curled at her feet, lifted his head at her sudden spike in tension. She hadn't looked at this photo since that night, hadn't needed to. The memories were burned into her mind with perfect clarity. "What's the connection?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Mike pulled up a chair. "The Baltic Trader. It's registered to a shell company. Took some digging, but I traced it back through 7 different corporations. Want to guess where the trail ends?" Sarah closed her eyes. Lastochka. The same people Marcus was investigating when he died. Mike leaned forward. "Sarah, what exactly did Max find out there?" The question triggered a flash of memory. Marcus's last words to her that night. "Sometimes the biggest secrets float right on the surface." She looked down at Max, remembering the day he'd first been assigned to her, just 2 months after Marcus's death. She'd resisted, of course. Didn't want another partner, especially not a rookie K9 fresh out of training. But there had been something in Max's eyes even then. An intensity, an intelligence that went beyond his training. "Tell me again what happened that night," Mike said softly. "The night Marcus died." Sarah stood, moving to the window. The port stretched out below, looking deceptively peaceful in the morning light. It was supposed to be a routine inspection. Marcus had a tip about contraband on a ship called the St. Mary. We split up to cover more ground. He took the lower decks with Rex, I took the upper levels. She paused, the memories flooding back. I heard Rex bark, then gunshots. By the time I got down there, her voice caught. Marcus was gone. Rex was badly wounded. The shooter had vanished, along with whatever evidence they'd found. And the investigation. Internal Affairs ruled it a tragic accident. Said Marcus must have surprised an ordinary thief. Sarah's laugh was bitter. They closed the case within a week. Refused to connect it to any of his ongoing investigations. Mike nodded slowly. And now Max shows up 8 miles offshore, right where satellite imagery shows the Baltic Trader was anchored, even though all official records say it was in Savannah. Sarah turned back to her desk, pulling up the fragments of video from Max's damaged camera. The Russian voices were clearer now after audio enhancement, though the words were still indistinct. But one phrase kept repeating, "Lastochka returns." Max suddenly sat up, his ears forward. A moment later, Sarah's office door opened. Captain Wilson stood in the doorway, his expression darkening at the sight of Mike. "Collins." A word? It wasn't a request. Mike gathered his files quickly. "I'll look into those shipping manifests," he said, giving Sarah a meaningful look as he left. Wilson closed the door behind him. "You've been asking questions about the Baltic Trader." "Yes, sir." "Following up on—" "Drop it." Wilson's voice was ice. "That's not a suggestion, Officer Collins. Whatever you think is happening here, you're wrong. Don't make the same mistake your former partner did." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Wilson had never acknowledged any connection to Marcus's case before. Max rose slowly to his feet, that now familiar growl building in his chest. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "are you saying Marcus's death wasn't an accident?" Wilson's expression shifted, just for a moment, before his professional mask returned. "I'm saying some mysteries are better left unsolved. Take the week off, Collins. That's an order." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and keep your K9 on a shorter leash. We wouldn't want him taking another unexpected swim." The threat was clear. Sarah waited until Wilson's footsteps faded before sinking into her chair, her hands shaking. Max pressed against her leg, whining softly. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through recent photos until she found what she was looking for, a shot of the Baltic Trader's stern she'd managed to capture the night before. Zooming in on the barely visible serial number, she sent it to Mike with a single question. When was this ship built? His response came moments later, 2019. Sarah stared at the photo of Marcus, pieces clicking into place. The St. Mary, the ship he died on 6 years ago, had supposedly been scrapped in 2018. But if she squinted at the image of the Baltic trader beneath the fresh paint and new name, the hull shape was identical. Max's camera had caught voices speaking Russian. Marcus had been investigating the Lastochka syndicate, and now Wilson, who'd helped close Marcus's case so quickly, was warning her away from the same ship where Max had nearly died. She looked down at her partner. "You found something out there, didn't you? Something they've been hiding for 6 years." Max's tail thumped once against the floor. His eyes, so much like Rex's had been, held that same determined intelligence she'd first noticed 6 years ago. She hadn't understood then why the K9 unit had insisted on partnering her with this particular dog, fresh out of training, when there were more experienced K9s available. Now she wondered if maybe there had been a reason, if maybe Max had been chosen specifically because of what had happened to Marcus and Rex. Because someone knew that eventually the truth would surface. Sarah opened her drawer and pulled out her backup weapon, checking it before slipping it into her ankle holster. If Wilson wanted her to take a week off, fine. That would give her plenty of time to investigate without the department watching. "Come on, partner," she said softly. "Let's go find out what Marcus discovered 6 years ago." As they left the office, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that everything, Max's appearance in the ocean, the Baltic trader's return, Wilson's threats, was connected to that night 6 years ago. The night she'd lost one partner and gained another. The night the Lastochka syndicate had first shown its hand, and somewhere out there, probably on a ship that officially didn't exist, were the answers Max had risked his life to expose. The night shift security guard at Atlantic Record Storage didn't even blink at Sarah's badge. "Evidence retrieval for a cold case," she explained, Max at her heel. The guard buzzed them through, barely looking up from his crossword puzzle. The basement archive smelled of mold and forgotten paper. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through decades of dust as she moved along the rows, Max following silently. After Wilson's threat, she'd known they needed to work fast. The official records of Marcus's death might have been sanitized, but her former partner had been meticulous about keeping his own notes. "B-17, she muttered, finding the right shelf. "Here we go, boy." The box was exactly where she remembered, though she hadn't touched it since that week after the funeral. Inside, beneath Marcus's personal effects, lay his private case notebooks. Sarah pulled out the most recent one, its pages still water-stained from that night on the St. Mary. A sudden bark from Max made her jump. He was staring intently at the door, hackles raised. "Atlanta PD," a voice called from the stairwell. "Officer Collins, we know you're down there." Sarah recognized the voice. Detective Rivera from Internal Affairs. The same man who'd closed Marcus's case in record time 6 years ago. She quickly photographed several pages from the notebook with her phone, then slipped it into her jacket. "Just a minute," she called back, buying time as she returned the box to its shelf. To Max, she whispered, "Back door, quiet." They slipped through the emergency exit just as footsteps reached their aisle. Sarah's heart pounded as they ran through the back alley, the sound of voices echoing behind them. In her car, hands shaking slightly, Sarah pulled up the photos she'd taken. Marcus's handwriting was messy, but legible. Lastochka, using ship modifications. False bottoms in cargo holds. Same vessel, different names. Connection to Port Authority confirmed. Key contact, White Swan. Max's sudden growl made her look up. A black SUV had appeared at the end of the street, its engine idling. "Hold on, partner." Sarah threw the car into drive, tires squealing as they took off in the opposite direction. The SUV's headlights filled her rearview mirror instantly. They weaved through downtown Atlanta's empty streets, the SUV staying close behind. Sarah's mind raced. Marcus had found proof of modified ships, just like the St. Mary that had become the Baltic trader. But what was White Swan? A second SUV appeared ahead, trying to cut them off. Sarah yanked the wheel hard, taking them down a narrow service road. Max braced himself against the turn, totally focused on the road ahead. Her phone buzzed. Mike. She put it on speaker. Sarah got into Marcus's old email account. Last message he sent that night was an image. Corrupted, but I recovered part of it, some kind of blueprint. Ship modification plans. Mike, what was the date on those plans? That's the thing. They're dated next week. Sarah's blood ran cold. They weren't just chasing old evidence. Whatever Marcus had discovered 6 years ago was still happening. And according to those plans, something big was coming. The SUVs were still behind them as they approached the port. Sarah had an idea. Risky, but their only chance. She killed her headlights and took a sharp turn between 2 rows of containers. Max, remember that night we chased the drug runners? Same thing, boy. Find us a way out. Her partner's training kicked in. He'd spent countless hours learning the port's layout. Now he barked at each turn she needed to take, leading them through the maze of containers while their pursuers' lights faded behind wrong turns. Finally, they emerged near an abandoned loading dock. Sarah cut the engine, breathing hard. Max stayed alert, watching for any sign of pursuit. In the sudden quiet, she pulled out Marcus's notebook. Something about White Swan nagged at her memory. She flipped through the water-damaged pages until... there, a business card stuck between the pages. Blanc Signe Imports. White Swan, she whispered. It was a company name. Her phone buzzed again. Mike had sent another message. Sarah, those blueprints. They're for a submarine bay hidden inside a cargo hold. And I found Blanc Signe Imports in the port records. They're expecting a shipment tomorrow night. Max suddenly tensed, staring at something through the windshield. Sarah followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. There, being carefully guided into dock by silent tugs, was the Baltic trader, and painted on one of the containers being loaded onto it, the Blanc Signe logo. "Good boy," she breathed, scratching Max's ears. "You found their pipeline, didn't you? That's why they tried to kill you." The pieces were falling into place. Marcus had discovered the Lastochka Syndicate's method, ships modified to carry submarines, letting them transfer cargo undetected at sea. He'd died before he could prove it. Now Max had found the same operation still running, bigger than ever. And tomorrow night, they were planning something big. Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. "You're just like your old partner. Don't make me deal with you the same way. W." Max growled at the message, the same dangerous sound he'd made around Wilson. Sarah nodded slowly. "I know, boy, but this time, we've got something Marcus didn't." She pulled out his notebook again. "We've got proof, and we've got each other." She started the car, keeping the lights off. They had until tomorrow night to stop whatever the Lastochka Syndicate was planning, to finish what Marcus had started, and this time they weren't letting anyone disappear into the depths. Night fog rolled across the port, thick enough to blur the Baltic traders' running lights into ghostly halos. Sarah watched through binoculars from her position on a nearby warehouse roof as crews loaded the last containers. Beside her, Max lay perfectly still, only his eyes moving as he tracked the activity below. Mike's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Coast Guards tracking 3 unmarked vessels approaching from the east. Just like you said, they're converging right where Max was found." Sarah checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. The Baltic trader was scheduled to depart at midnight. According to Marcus's notes, this was how the Lastochka Syndicate operated, loading legitimate cargo in port, then meeting submarines at sea to transfer the real shipment. "Any word from the FBI task force?" "They're standing by," Mike replied. "But Sarah, Wilson's there. He just arrived at the port." She felt Max tense beside her. After finding Marcus's evidence, she'd contacted the FBI directly, bypassing the department. Now she knew why Marcus had never trusted internal channels. The corruption went too deep. Movement on the ship's deck caught her attention. A figure emerged from the bridge, their face illuminated briefly by a cigarette's glow. Sarah's breath caught. "Mike, get me an ID on the bridge. That's not the registered captain." A moment of silence then. "Facial recognition is matching." "Sarah, it's Dmitry Volkov. He was the prime suspect in Marcus's murder but disappeared before questioning." Max's low growl confirmed it. He'd seen Volkov that night in the ocean, probably right before they tried to kill him. The same man who'd killed Marcus was running the same operation 6 years later. Sarah's radio crackled. The FBI strike team was in position. They'd move on her signal, but only if they caught the submarines making contact. They needed proof of the transfer to bring down the entire network. "Sarah," Mike's voice was urgent. "Wilson's heading your way." She looked at Max. "Ready, partner?" His eyes locked with hers, filled with the same determination she felt. They'd come too far to back down now. The access door behind them opened quietly. "I always knew you were too much like Marcus for your own good." Wilson emerged from the shadows, his service weapon trained on Sarah. "Stand up, slowly." Sarah rose, keeping her hands visible. Max stayed low, a dangerous rumble building in his chest. "Call off your dog," Wilson ordered. "He's not my dog. He's my partner." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Just like Marcus was, before you helped kill him." Wilson's laugh was cold. Marcus was an idealist. He thought he could take down the entire Lastochka network, just like you think you can now. The difference is, I have proof. Sarah nodded toward the Baltic trader. "And in about 10 minutes, we'll have more when those submarines surface." Something shifted in Wilson's eyes. "You really think you're going to live that long?" Max moved so fast, Wilson didn't have time to react. The gun went flying as 200 pounds of highly trained K9 slammed into the captain's chest. Sarah drew her weapon in the same motion. "FBI, don't move!" But Wilson was already rolling, kicking Max aside and sprinting for the fire escape. Sarah aimed, but he'd vanished into the fog. Her radio exploded with activity. The submarines had been spotted. The FBI was moving in. "Mike, Wilson's heading for the ship. He'll warn them." "Sarah, wait." But she was already moving, Max right beside her. They took the fire escape at full speed, hitting the ground running. Shouts and gunfire erupted from the Baltic trader as the FBI teams engaged. They rounded a stack of containers and found Wilson ahead, almost at the gangway. Without hesitation, Max accelerated, eating up the distance between them. Wilson turned, a second gun appearing from his ankle holster. His first shot went wide. His second didn't. Sarah heard Max yelp, saw him stumble. Her heart stopped. Then her partner did something that would become legend in the K9 unit. Despite the bullet wound in his shoulder, Max launched himself up the gangway in 3 bounds. His jaws closed on Wilson's gun arm just as the captain reached for his radio. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. Sarah reached them as Wilson fought to break free, blood streaming from his arm. 6 years, she said, keeping her weapon trained on him. "You helped them kill my partner, and you've been helping them ever since." "You don't understand," Wilson spat. "The money they offered." A single bark from Max cut him off. Sarah followed her partner's gaze, just as a figure appeared above them on the deck. Dmitry Volkov raised his weapon. "Captain Wilson has outlived his usefulness. As have you." 3 shots rang out. Sarah felt the wind of a bullet pass her cheek. Then Volkov's chest erupted in red as FBI snipers found their target. The next few minutes were chaos. The submarines tried to flee, but found Coast Guard vessels waiting. FBI teams swarmed the Baltic trader, securing evidence of the modified cargo hold, just as Marcus had documented. Sarah knelt beside Max, carefully examining his wound. "You crazy brave partner," she whispered. "What am I going to do with you?" His tail wagged once, weakly, but his eyes stayed alert. Even injured, he was still on duty. Medical teams arrived as the sun began to rise, bathing the port in golden light. Sarah watched them lead Wilson away in handcuffs, followed by a parade of arrested crew members and port officials. "Officer Collins," an FBI agent approached. "We found this in Volkov's cabin. Thought you should have it." It was a photograph, water-damaged, but clear enough. Marcus and Rex on the deck of the St. Mary, taken the night they died. On the back was written a single word in Russian, Lastochka. Max pressed against her leg, steadier now after the medics had treated him. Sarah showed him the photo. "We did it, partner. We finished what they started." In the distance, police boats escorted the captured submarines to shore. The morning fog was lifting, revealing the truth that had been hidden in these waters for 6 years. And beside her, just as he'd been since the day they met, Max stood guard, watching the horizon where he'd nearly lost his life to protect the truth, where he'd proven that sometimes the greatest acts of loyalty come from the most unexpected partners. 3 weeks after the Baltic trader raid, Sarah stood at the podium in Atlanta PD's main conference room, cameras flashing as she pinned a special commendation to Max's tactical vest. Her partner sat perfectly still, his proud bearing somewhat at odds with the bandage still visible on his shoulder. 6 years ago, she began, her voice carrying through the packed room, we lost 2 of Atlanta's finest officers, Detective Marcus Chen and his K9 partner Rex. Today, we can finally say their killers have been brought to justice. The evidence recovered from the Baltic trader had blown the case wide open. 13 port officials arrested, 3 submarine crews in custody. Wilson facing multiple life sentences for murder and corruption. The Lastochka syndicate's entire East Coast operation dismantled, but most importantly, they'd found Marcus's missing camera in Volkov's private safe. The footage showed everything: the discovery of the submarine bay, Wilson's betrayal, the shots that killed Marcus and Rex. The truth, preserved all these years, finally brought to light. After the ceremony, Sarah found Mike waiting in her office. Got something you need to see. He handed her a thick file. Max's original training records. Took some digging, but I found out why he was assigned to you. Sarah opened the file, Max watching curiously from his bed in the corner. The documents showed he'd been part of a special program, trained specifically to detect submarine materials and hidden compartments in ships, and his trainer, the same K9 officer who had trained Rex. It wasn't random, Mike explained. After Marcus died, they knew someone needed to continue his investigation, but it had to be subtle. So they gave me a partner who could find what Marcus found. Sarah looked at Max with new understanding. That's why you were so focused on the Baltic trader. You were literally trained for this. Max's tail thumped against his bed. His shoulder was healing well, and the vet said he'd be back on full duty within a week, though Sarah suspected he'd been conducting his own patrols of the port even while technically on medical leave. A knock at the door interrupted them. The FBI task force leader entered, carrying a familiar notebook. Thought you might want this back, she said, handing Marcus's journal to Sarah. The forensics team finally finished with it. There's something you should see on the last page. Sarah opened to the back. There, in Marcus's handwriting, was a note she'd missed before. If anything happens to me, watch the ships. Trust the dogs. They know what we're looking for. He knew, Sarah said softly. He knew they were on to him, but he also knew someone would follow his trail. And he was right. The FBI agent smiled. The evidence you and Max uncovered didn't just solve his murder. It exposed corruption in ports up and down the coast. The Lastochka syndicate is finished. After they left, Sarah sat at her desk, looking at the photo that now held pride of place. Marcus and Rex, beside her and Max, past and present united in one frame. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Turn on the news. The TV showed Wilson being led into court, head bowed. The reporter's voice filled the room. Former Atlanta Police Captain James Wilson pleaded guilty today to all charges, including the murder of Detective Marcus Chen and K9 Officer Rex. Sources say Wilson's testimony will lead to dozens more arrests. Sarah muted the broadcast, turning to her partner. Ready for patrol. Max was already at the door, his new commendation gleaming on his vest. They had the evening shift, checking the now secure port where submarines no longer lurked in modified cargo holds. As they walked through the precinct, other officers nodded respectfully. The story had become legend. The K9 found swimming 8 miles offshore, refusing to let a 6-year-old murder stay buried, proving that sometimes justice just needs the right partner to bring it to the surface. Sarah paused at their patrol car, running her hand over Max's healed shoulder. Marcus would be proud, you know, of both of us. Max looked up at her, then out toward the port where container ships moved legally through the evening light. No more hidden compartments, no more secret transfers at sea. Just the honest work of a port city, watched over by partners who knew that truth, like bodies in water, eventually rises to the surface. "Come on, partner," Sarah said, opening the car door. "Let's go keep these waters safe." Max jumped in, taking his familiar position in the back seat. Through the windshield, the port stretched out before them, its waters now clear of the shadows that had haunted them for 6 years. And in the dying light, a K9 unit resumed its patrol, partners bound by something stronger than duty, the unshakable loyalty that turns good cops into legends and ordinary dogs into heroes. Justice had been served, and in Atlanta's port, a new chapter was beginning, watched over by those who had proven that some bonds go deeper than darkness, and some partnerships transcend even death itself. Max's alert bark brought Sarah's attention back to the present. He'd spotted something on the docks that needed checking, just a routine call this time, but they'd handle it the same way they handled everything, together, because that's what partners do. And in the end, that's what had brought down the Lastochka syndicate, solved Marcus's murder, and cleaned up Atlanta's port. Not just evidence or investigation, but the unbreakable bond between a dedicated officer and her extraordinary K9 partner. A bond strong enough to survive bullets, betrayal, and the depths of the ocean itself. A bond that had finally brought justice home.